Welcome to the first informational video on this channel. I'm based in the UK and have a keen interest in military and aviation history, so I'll be making content related to that and indeed anything else that I find interesting. Today's video, however, takes us across the world to here, Dien Bien Phu. The battle itself took place in 1954 during a period of colonial turmoil towards the end of the imperial era. In the 20th century, Vietnam was part of France's Indochinese colonies. Guerrilla warfare was being waged in Vietnam since the political turmoil following the end of the Second World War in 1945. After over a year of low-level fighting, this guerrilla warfare escalated into the First Indochina War on the 19th of December 1946 by the Viet Minh against the French colonial administration. The Viet Minh were led by Vo Nguyen Giap and Ho Chi Minh. Vo Nguyen Giap, a self-taught general, largely handled the military action of the group, while Ho Chi Minh largely handled the political action of the group. Dien Bien Phu today is the provincial capital of Dien Bien province, just 10 kilometres from the Laotian border in the Mong Tan Valley. In 1946, the French Far East Expeditionary Corps, under the recently appointed General Henri Navarre, decided Dien Bien Phu was the ideal place to cut off Viet Minh supply lines to the neighbouring kingdom of Laos and force them into a major confrontation. The idea behind this was to cripple them and force them into capitulation. Options for getting to Dien Bien Phu are limited due to its remote geography. Nowadays you can either get a bus from Lai Chau or a short, roughly 45 minutes flight from Hanoi Airport. In March of 2023, I opted for the flight into Dien Bien Phu's airport at the Old French Airbase. Accommodation for foreigners and local English proficiency is very limited, however the sites themselves are well worth a visit, and I hope you enjoy what I found and find it interesting yourself. Major General René Cogny, the French commander in the Tonkin Delta, proposed that Dien Bien Phu be used as an anchor point, utilising the airfield built by the Japanese in the Second World War as a base of operations. The French decided that the best way to supply Dien Bien Phu was by air into Mong Tan airfield. The valley was remote, making land travel slow, difficult and susceptible to guerrilla attacks by the Viet Minh. Furthermore, they had the belief that the Viet Minh did not possess any anti-aircraft capability. On the 20th of November 1953, the French began Operation Castor. 9,000 troops were flown or dropped into Dien Bien Phu with their equipment to prepare the airfield for fortification. They were dropped into drop zones Natasha, northwest of Dien Bien Phu, Octavie, southwest, and Zimon, southeast. Upon arrival, the 6 French parachute battalions met resistance from a battalion of the Viet Minh's elite 148th Independent Infantry Regiment, who were headquartered in Dien Bien Phu. It's worth noting that 3 out of the regiment's 4 battalions were absent at the time of landing. The French, however, succeeded in capturing and securing the settlement, as well as the airfield itself. Meanwhile, on the 24th of November, Vo Nguyen Giap, who had been expecting an attack but did not know when or where it would occur, ordered the 316th Division and what remained of the 148th Infantry Regiment to attack the French garrison at Lai Chau, on the border with China, while the 308th, 312th and 351st Divisions were ordered to assault Dien Bien Phu from their staging area of Viet Bac to the north. Parallel to this, the newly promoted French Colonel Christian de Castries' move was to create a heavily fortified position at Dien Bien Phu with the airfield and resources that they had available to them. This position would consist of the airfield, a central headquarters, Elian, and 7 satellite positions: Huguette to the west, Claudine and Isabelle to the south, Beatrice and Dominique to the northeast, Gabrielle to the north, and Anne-Marie to the northwest. One of the southern satellites, Isabelle, was to cover the reserve airstrip. As per Vo Nguyen Giap's plan, the French troops garrisoned at Lai Chau left to go south to Dien Bien Phu on the 9th of December. Attacks from the Viet Minh en route meant that of the 2,100 French troops, that left Lai Chau, only 185 arrived at Dien Bien Phu on the 22nd of December. The French forces at the start of the battle numbered at around 16,000 and included, but were by no means limited to, 4 infantry battalions and 3 mortar companies of the Foreign Legion, 3 infantry battalions and 6 artillery batteries from the North African and colonial origins, primarily Moroccans and Algerians. Also present were a detachment of the French Republican Guard and the Gendarmerie Mobile, who remained around the headquarters during the battle. The remainder of the French forces were drawn from regular French infantry, cavalry, artillery, engineer and logistics regiments, as well as a number of loyal Vietnamese and ethnic Thai units. On the other side, the Viet Minh forces under Vo Nguyen Giap numbered some 50,000 troops in the hills that surrounded the valley. The French equipment heavily featured equipment provided for them by the Americans, such as M101 105mm howitzers, Vought F4U Corsairs, along with F4F Hellcats that were used as attack aircraft, and some 10 M24 Chaffee light tanks, the remains of several of which can be found at the Hill A1 Museum, and one of which serves as a memorial in its own right near the site of the former French headquarters. There even were several Fairchild C919 transport aircraft flown by 24 CIA pilots that assisted with the aerial transport and paradrop operations. The Viet Minh equipment was largely of Soviet or Chinese origin, with the notable exception of American M101 105mm howitzers used by their 351st Heavy Division. These were sourced by the Chinese government from captured guns taken during the Chinese Civil War and the Korean War. The most notable fact regarding the Vietnamese equipment was that the Viet Minh did not, in fact, lack anti-aircraft capability, as the French had assumed. Rather, the artillery and anti-aircraft artillery in General Giap's arsenal outnumbered that of the French 4-1. However, the issue of geography plagued the Viet Minh artillerymen. Dien Bien Phu is situated in a valley surrounded by mountains which were impassable by vehicles and difficult on foot. The guns did not have the range or ability to fire over the mountains, so the only option was to place them on top. General Giap's answer to this problem was simply to drag the guns up the foothills of the mountains. The Viet Minh used a chocking system that almost resembles that of a roller coaster chain lift. An analogue for this system can be found in the Dien Bien Phu Museum. One group of soldiers would, when signalled, drag the gun up the hill a couple of metres using ropes and stop. Soldiers behind the gun would place chocks behind the wheels to stop them rolling back. This cycle was then repeated until the guns were in position. On the 31st of January 1954, once the guns were placed, the Viet Minh began the bombardment of Dien Bien Phu using direct fire. This is where the gun crews themselves conduct their own spotting with their own eyes, binoculars and sights, rather than relying on information from a third party such as forward-placed scouts or aircraft. The assault began on the 13th of March 1954 with the Viet Minh's 312th Division assaulting the northeastern satellite base of Beatrice with their 141st and 209th Infantry Regiments. Beatrice was manned by the 3rd Battalion, the 13th Foreign Legion Demi Brigade. In the run-up to the infantry assault, artillery bombardments on the satellite managed to hit and destroy the command post, killing Major Paul Peugeot, the battalion commander, and later the commander of the central subsector of Dien Bien Phu, Lieutenant Colonel Jules Gaucher. The infantry assault proved bloody, with 350 French legionnaires and 600 Viet Minh soldiers killed, along with 1,200 Viet Minh soldiers wounded. The success of the Viet Minh artillery and the ranged onslaught that continued led to the French artillery commander, Colonel Charles Pirou, committing suicide by grenade in his bunker. In the following days, from the 14th to the 17th of March, 2 more satellites fell to the Viet Minh, Gabrielle and Anne-Marie to the northwest. Gabrielle fell first on the 14th of March, following an artillery barrage that managed to simultaneously take Mon Thang airfield out of commission and stun the 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Algerian Rifle Regiment, an elite Algerian infantry battalion. The Viet Minh's 308th Division sent 2 regiments into Gabrielle on the evening of the 17th, an engagement that led to the battalion headquarters of the Algerian Rifles being struck by Viet Minh artillery, wounding the battalion commander and many of the personnel with him. Colonel Pierre Lenglet, de Castries' officer commanding the parachute forces at Dien Bien Phu, was tasked with leading a counterattack on Gabriel. However, the planned actions utilised the 5th Vietnamese Parachute Battalion, Vietnamese paratroopers who were exhausted from jumping in the previous day. The counterattack took heavy losses from Viet Minh artillery and failed, forcing the Algerian Rifles to withdraw from Gabriel in the morning of the 18th, leaving the losses at the satellite numbering around 1,000 French and between 1,000 and 2,000 Vietnamese dead. Following the fall of Gabriel, the Thai troops, a local ethnic minority in Dien Bien province fighting for the French, who manned the satellite Anne-Marie, were demoralised and largely fled or defected, leaving those who remained, along with the limited numbers of French in the area, to withdraw. In the roughly 2 weeks that followed, fighting died down significantly. Colonel de Castries confined himself to his bunker and gave de facto command to Colonel Lenglet, as senior officers in the garrison and beyond felt that he was incompetent. French forces continued to be harassed by Viet Minh artillery and anti-aircraft fire, including the death of 2 CIA pilots. By the end of the battle, the French had 167 aircraft that were at least damaged by anti-aircraft fire. The French army saw limited success in this period, with an attack on Viet Minh anti-aircraft guns to the west of Dien Bien Phu, resulting in 350 Viet Minh casualties, and the destruction of an estimated 17 anti-aircraft guns. However, during this period, the Viet Minh managed to cut off the satellite of Isabelle to the south, setting the battle up for the endgame to take the central sectors. The remaining 3 months saw consistent bloody fighting in the 4 remaining sectors: Huguette, Dominique, Claudine, and the central sector of Elion, which ultimately resulted in a French loss and surrender at Dien Bien Phu. Now, each sector has a very nuanced and interesting story. However, I would like to focus on just one of these, the central sector, Elion. More specifically, I'd like to focus on a strong point known to the French as Elion 2 and the Vietnamese as Hill A1. Much of the fortifications at Hill A1 were reconstructed, so during my trip to Dien Bien Phu, I was able to visit the site itself and gain an insight into what conditions were like for the soldiers who fought there. Hill A1 was the site of arguably the fiercest fighting at Dien Bien Phu. The hill was lost and regained by the French several times and was of significant strategic importance to both sides due to its proximity to the French garrison HQ and other vital targets. Fighting at Hill A1 concluded with the detonation of a Viet Minh mine underneath many of the French positions on the 7th of May, with the equivalent force of 960 kilograms of TNT, roughly 1/15 of the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima 9 years prior. Upon arrival at Dien Bien Phu, and indeed at Hill A1, one of the first things you notice is the weather. Rain and mist are frequent due to the mountainous terrain, and the air is hot and humid during the day, but still notably cold at night during spring. The clay-based soil transforms significantly with moisture and forms a smooth mud that can prove difficult to manoeuvre oneself in, as seen here in some of the remaining trenches. The soil and rock in the area did, however, prove itself useful to the French when trenches and positions were dug into the hillside, with fortifications made of a combination of wood and cut rock, as well as brick. The trenches ranged in depth, with trenches lower down the hill generally being just under the depth of a soldier's height, and the trenches at the top of the hill being just over. The lines of sandbags on top of the rows and rows of trenches were reminiscent of scenes from the Great War, which took place just 40 years prior to the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The trench systems were broken up by a series of bunkers on each section, which allowed soldiers to take cover and rest, as well as providing points for platoon, company and battalion command. As you reach the higher command posts, you can notice that the bunkers and to some extent the trenches are built and reinforced using more concrete and brick to offer more protection from shelling and small arms fire. Once on top of the hill, it becomes clear why it was so strategically important. It offers a clear view of the city and sight of the French headquarters below, blocked only by the trees which were not present at the time of the battle. However, most importantly, it offers a clear line of sight on all aircraft coming into the Mon Tan airfield, meaning that if the Viet Minh were able to expand their anti-aircraft capability to the top of Hill A1, they would cripple the French aerial movements into and out of Dien Bien Phu, and effectively cut them off from all forms of supply or escape. The crater from the mine detonated under the hill is still very much clear, demonstrating the effect that this battle has had not only on the city, but on the landscape as a whole, even today, almost 70 years on from the battle. Shortly after the fall of Hill A1, the French headquarters was swiftly overrun by Vietnamese forces. Colonel de Castries' radio operator's last words were, "The enemy has overrun us. We are blowing up everything. Vive la France." Simultaneously, the soldiers of the French Foreign Legion followed a legion tradition that dated back to the Battle of Cameroon in 1863 and attempted to break out of Dien Bien Phu and escape. Unfortunately, this attempt was unsuccessful as, even though aspects of the Legion managed to escape the fighting, they could not escape the valley. The final French structure to fall, Strongpoint Lily, was manned by Moroccan soldiers and had not been overrun. They surrendered on the night of the 7th of May 1954, signifying the end of the battle. A panoramic painting of the surrender of de Castries and the French garrison, as well as a dramatisation of the battle itself, can be found upstairs in the Dien Bien Phu Museum. On the 8th of May 1954, exactly 9 years after France had joined the Allies in celebrating a victory in Europe, the Viet Minh counted 11,721 French prisoners who were subsequently force-marched to prison camps. The Red Cross was able to extract 858 prisoners, but of the remaining 10,863 prisoners, only 3,290 were repatriated 4 months later. Of those who weren't, 4,560 were confirmed dead, and 3,013 have an unknown fate. French casualties number around 4,500, while the official Vietnamese estimate is 4,020 dead. However, estimates range that the Viet Minh casualties were anywhere between 8,000 and 22,900 dead of an original army of 50,000. Also on the 8th of May 1954, France and the Viet Minh entered the Geneva Conference, which concluded with Vietnam being partitioned into 2 zones, Communist Northern Vietnam and the State of Vietnam in the south, who rejected the agreement. The idea was that the 2 states would be reunited in 1956 with the final withdrawal of French troops and a national election. But despite the withdrawal happening, no such election took place. Nowadays, the Communist Vietnamese government view Dien Bien Phu as their greatest individual victory, with propaganda during the later war with the United States latching on to the national pride surrounding it, calling the failure of Operation Linebacker 2 and Vietnamese aerial victory during the bombing of Hanoi and Haiphong a Dien Bien Phu in the air. The Vietnamese government built a gigantic memorial to the victory at Dien Bien Phu on top of the largest and most central hill in the city, at the top of gigantic marble stairs, much akin to many Soviet memorials, such as Mamayev Kurgan, to remember Stalingrad. There is also a smaller, more poignant and reflective memorial at the site of Hill A1, complete with modern sculptures and a traditional Buddhist temple. The French memorial to the battle is somewhat more modest and found round the back of a housing and industrial estate after a long walk down muddy, unpaved roads. Dien Bien Phu has become something of a pilgrimage point for Vietnamese patriots, Chinese and Vietnamese communists, and Vietnamese soldiers and veterans. There were many an occasion during my trip where quiet sites would suddenly become full of uniformed Vietnamese and their families, taking in the sights and history, who were more than happy to interact and take photos with us, and who appreciated our interest in their military history. I hope you've enjoyed this video on the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. If you're a military history nerd such as myself and ever in the position to go, I would highly recommend doing so. I do plan on making similar videos like this in future and perhaps branching out into my other non-military areas of interest. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please do leave a like and subscribe. And of course, if there are any areas of interest you particularly would like to see, please do let me know in the comment section. Thank you.
Bóng Điện Biên, Hồ Chí Minh, quân trở về, xưa Vietnamese.